After so much excitement and anticipation of free agency set to begin in the NBA, you had Bulls fans all over Twitter talking about how they couldn't sleep. We were counting down the hours to the start time of 6 p.m. Eastern, and of course, once it hit, you had the Woj and the Shams Bobs coming in one after the other, all within a matter of minutes. You saw all of these teams being aggressive and making their teams better, whether re-upping with their current players or signing new ones. Not saying all the free agency moves that were made thus far were good deals necessarily, but more so just saying there were a lot of transactions, all happening rapidly. But as each hour passed, and you saw literally nothing from the Bulls as far as any free agent signings or trades, not even Zach Lavine, by the way, which I mentioned in my last video I'm not as worried about because it's been made pretty clear he's going to re-sign with the Bulls. A little odd because really that was one of the Woj bombs that you thought was going to happen at 6:01 like we saw last offseason when the Bulls signed Lonzo Ball, and then they got hit with the tampering violation. Funny how nothing has been reported on this season so far as it relates to tampering, even though you had 10 to 15 announcements all come within the first 3 minutes of free agency opening. But anyway, I'm not as worried about Zach Lavine, although I will say, if Zach doesn't sign by the end of the day tomorrow, it is a bit cause for concern because what else is he waiting for if in fact the Bulls have offered him that 5-year max $212 million. But we'll have to save that for tomorrow depending on what happens. But what did bother me about what happened in day one of free agency is the fact that the Bulls passed up on so many opportunities for that mid-level exception roster spot available to them to address some of their current needs like size, rim protection, and shooting. You saw a guy like Isaiah Hartenstein go to the Knicks for 2 years, $16 million. 2 years, 16. Something the Bulls could have easily competed with to make a better offer at the full mid-level exception for a little over $10 million. Mo Bamba re-signing with the Magic when it looked like he was all but gone, and it was even reported that Mo Bamba wanted to join the Bulls, but the Bulls weren't willing to give him what his asking price was, which ended up being 2 years, $22 million. Mo Bamba was a perfect role player for this roster to give you rim protection and outside shooting off of the bench, and still young with upside potential. PJ Tucker, an option I actually didn't like for the Bulls, but he signed with the Sixers, which the Bulls couldn't have matched anyway with their salary cap. Chris Boucher re-signs with the Raptors. Bobby Portis re-signs with the Bucks. Even on the guard front, Victor Oladipo re-signed with the Heat for a 1-year deal. Malik Monk goes to the Kings. Like, the Bulls couldn't have even pitched him a better scenario coming to Chicago for a little less money rather than playing with the most incompetent franchise in the league that hasn't made the playoffs in like, what, 15 years? And yes, I'm aware a lot of these guys were offered more money than the Bulls had available to them, so you probably weren't getting some of these guys anyway, but are you not going in with the right pitches to these free agents that would make them think twice and say, you know, maybe I should take a smaller deal to go play in Chicago because, hey, they actually have got some good pieces that can do something this season, and I want to be a part of that rather than going to, say, Sacramento, Orlando, or New York. Like, how does that happen? Kyle Anderson, 2 years, $18 million, a great shooter, a forward to give the Bulls some size. How do you not try and snag him for the mid-level exception, which is more than $9 million a year? Nick Claxton, 2 years, $20 million to stay with the Nets. Nick Batum staying with the Clippers. JaVale McGee going to the Nuggets, although the Bulls would have been foolish to offer him that kind of money that the Nuggets gave him. Like, I'm not saying all these guys would have been the perfect fit on this Bulls team, but there is a lot of solid options among the guys that I just mentioned that went to other teams. And instead, the Bulls went ahead with signing Andre Drummond to a 2-year deal worth $6.6 million. Now, I made a video already reacting to the Bulls picking up Drummond and discussed my thoughts on Drummond's fit with the Bulls, so I won't go too into detail on that here. You can check out my last video if you missed it. I'll leave a link to it on the end screen of this, but the Bulls chose to prioritize cheaper deals for players who don't necessarily fit their needs directly. So how does that happen to a Bulls team that is looking to contend now? Well, first, let me just say free agency isn't over. The offseason isn't over. Trades can still be made. So this rant that I'm about to go on is probably a bit reactionary, and it's possible that I put out a video tomorrow praising all the moves the Bulls made if they make a big trade, but I won't hold my breath for that. But reactionary aside, prisoner of the moment, whatever you want to call it, I do think there is a lot of truth to it, and that it's somewhat valid. So again, how does this happen? Well, I'll tell you how it happened. It happens when you have a cheap-ass owner that is more concerned with saving a couple bucks to avoid paying the luxury tax rather than truly focusing on building a contending team. Because if the Bulls did offer the full mid-level exception, they would be just slightly over the luxury tax line, which we all know historically speaking, the Reinsdorfs hardly ever pay into the luxury tax. I believe they have paid it only once or twice in near 40 years of owning the franchise. This even includes the dynasty years. And although this hasn't been confirmed that the Bulls weren't willing to offer the full mid-level exception because they didn't want to pay into the luxury tax, but come on now. When it's reported the Bulls weren't wanting to pay Mo Bamba the full mid-level exception, how they were looking to offer someone like Danilo Gallinari in the $7 to $8 million range, which would put them right below the tax line, what other reason would it be? Like, why would they be so stringent on not wanting to pay a player $2 million more for the full mid-level exception? You're talking about less than 2% of your total payroll at that point for an additional $2 million, and obviously less than 1% of what the entire franchise is worth. It's so negligible in the grand scheme of the team's overall payroll and the revenue that they generate. No, the only reason they are being so fickle on not wanting to pay a couple extra $1 million is because it puts them into the luxury tax. Never mind that they traded 3 first-round picks and committed large contracts to build out this team this past season. Never mind that they're looking at a timeline that has been fast-tracked to win now. Nah, saving some bucks to avoid the luxury tax is more important. What the hell is wrong with you? And no, not you guys. I'm directing this to Jerry Reinsdorf, not that he watches the channel anyway. You are a multi-billionaire and own a franchise that brings in hundreds of $millions in revenue a year off of players that you employ. And you're worried about paying the luxury tax? Are you kidding me? How do you expect to ever put together a successful team that can bring you a title and actually give you an even greater return when you have a consistently good team? How do you ever expect to succeed in this business when you're constantly penny pinching and not taking on any risks with your investments? And I know some will say, well, they did build the greatest dynasty ever assembled. Nah, they got lucky that Michael Jordan fell into their laps with the 3rd overall pick because the Blazers made the biggest mistake in basketball history by drafting Sam Bowie over Michael Jordan. And then even in the years where the Bulls were at the top of the East, the D Rose era, Derrick Rose also fell into their laps when they miraculously won the lottery with a 1.8% chance of getting the #1 pick, which got them Derrick Rose. Even throughout those times when they were actually winning and being a top team, whether in the 90s or the D Rose era, the owners were still cheap in their handlings of the team. Again, hardly ever paying the luxury tax, lowballing players like Scottie Pippen, Horace Grant, even Zach Lavine, who had to go out and get an offer sheet from the Kings when he was a restricted free agent. So we know the drill. Like, as fans, we're not oblivious to this. We know what they're doing as much as they may try and hide it. Michael Reinsdorf was interviewed by Casey Johnson on the Bulls Talk podcast a few months back, and he point blank asked him, would you be willing to spend into the luxury tax to continue building out this team? And Michael danced around the question at first, but then said, yes, they would. Bullshit. And I'm sorry for using language, but we're not idiots, okay? Stop trying to portray to the fan base that you actually care about producing a winning team and are not focused more so on just making money for the sake of making money, because it's the Chicago Bulls, a global brand, and you know the checks are going to keep coming whether the Bulls are good or bad. You don't care about this fan base nor the Bulls community. You're more focused on the bottom line, you're focused on yourselves, and that's pretty much it. And look, let's be honest, it's not just a bad look to the fans, because we've known this for some time now about the Reinsdorfs. It's also a bad look to players around the league because the perception of the Chicago Bulls was starting to shift. Once the new front office came in and they actually started making aggressive moves to get this team to start winning now, to build around Zach Lavine, trading for Vucevic, getting Lonzo Ball and DeMar DeRozan and Alex Caruso, you were changing this negative perception around the league that the Bulls and at the top management level were incompetent, cheap, and toxic. You now saw smart moves being made, winning type moves. And while Garpax were running things, you always kind of knew ownership was truly running the operation and Garpax were merely puppets. But it appeared as if this new Bulls front office, they were actually letting them run the team, giving them full autonomy to do what they want. And while part of that is true, there's no doubt in my mind that these shenanigans of being calculated and not going into the luxury tax, this was 100% directed by Jerry Reinsdorf to the front office to not exceed the tax level. There's no question. This was not something that Arturas and Mark Eversley did on their own. These are not the type of guys to be stingy in trying to save money for the Reinsdorfs if it wasn't directed by Jerry himself. The ownership should really be ashamed of themselves for being this stingy for a team that is worth billions of dollars. Bulls fans deserve better than this, the city of Chicago deserves better than this, and I just really hope this team one day gets sold because I really can't see this type of behavior changing when we have been seeing it for 40 years consistently now. Sell the team, keep your White Sox since you care more about baseball anyway, and be done with it. because quite frankly, you don't deserve all the great Bulls fans that are out there. I know this is probably a bit of an overreaction when we don't know the full extent of all the moves that are still left to come, and like I said, maybe there is more in the works that we'll be finding out shortly, but sorry, this rant has been a long time coming for me, dealing with the Bulls ownership and their shenanigans, and claiming they're doing what's best for the team. Give me a break. Anyway, subscribe if you guys like the content, and give it a like if you guys find the Reinsdorfs as annoying as I do, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.